I call her Kathleen Duncan. Here. Terry Hannick. Matthew Yost.
Here.
Trey Griffin.
Here.
Charlie Wetmore. Amanda Jackson Denmark. Ronald Williams.
Here.
Thank you.
Notice regarding adjournment. The Planning Commission will not hear new items after 9:30 p.m. unless authorized by a majority vote of the commission members present. Items which have not been heard before 9:30 may be continued to the next regular meeting or an additional meeting date as determined by the commission members. Notice regarding public comments. Every member of the public who is recognized to speak shall address the chairman and in speaking avoid disrespect to the board and commission, town staff, or other members of the meeting. State your name and address when speaking for the record. Comments are limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any public comments?
I have not received any.
Madam Chairman, if you could move your microphone so it can be a little bit closer to so we can hear.
Okay, can you hear me now? You good? Yeah. Okay. May I have an adoption of the agenda? Question?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Favor? May I have an adoption of the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
I recuse from it.
Trey recuses. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? And Terry, for the record, has joined us. Letting them know that you have joined us for the record.
I have.
So are there any public comments regarding any particular project? There's nothing at all. Okay. No old business. So we will go on to the new business. First up is the L Apartments street naming application, a request by the L Apartments LLC on behalf of the Reed Group for approval of a street naming application for new street names to be used in the proposed L Apartments multifamily development. The property is in Buckhalter Plan U, whatever, and consists of approximately 45 acres identified by tax number in your packet, located northeast of the intersection of Bluffton Parkway and Hampton Parkway.
Hey, Amanda, I have to recuse myself.
Okay, Matt? Matt
Okay.
has recused.
Commissioners, so again, this is a request by the L Apartments LLC on behalf of the Reed Group that owns the parcel for approval of street names to be used for the proposed multifamily development in parcel 10B. This is a project that you should be very familiar with. You actually approved the preliminary plan just a few months ago. One of the conditions of the Development Review Committee was that they provide 3 street names to allow addressing for 911 emergency services for all the buildings that will be constructed on site. And these 3 street names that they have chosen are Lowry Pass, Sykes Trail, and Riggs Lane. All 3 of these names were vetted with the neighboring municipalities, County, Hilton Head, Town of Hilton Head, Oil, Town of Bluffton. These have all been approved for use by all the So, as you are familiar, the Planning Commission actions for street naming application, as granted by the powers and duties set forth in UDO section 226C5, is that you can approve the application as submitted, approve it with conditions, or deny the application based on the following criteria: that it does not already exist within Beaufort County, that they're not the same primary names, such as Smith's Street or Boulevard, they are not similar or can be confused with another name, or complicated words or unconventional spellings, and are not numbers. expensive, they're logical, easy to pronounce, associated with the history of Bluffton when possible. May represent a common theme within the development, and they must comply with all other applicable requirements in the application's manual. Street names all meet the pre-mentioned criteria. Staff recommends that the following street names be approved as submitted: Lowry Pass, Sykes Trail, and Riggs Lane. Answer any questions, and I believe Duncan is here to represent the applicant, should you have any questions.
I'd like to make a motion accepting the names that have been provided.
There a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Well, discussion, is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Second item is Parcel 7A, a request by Parcel 7A LLC for approval of a preliminary development plan. The project consists of grading, limited clearing, grubbing, leveling, and restabilizing in the towns at Buckwalter. The property is zoned Buckwalter PUD and identified by tax map numbers in the packet, located northeast of the intersection of Buckwalter Parkway and Buckwalter Town Boulevard.
Amanda, I need to recuse myself.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen.
Okay, as Chairwoman, as you said, this is a request to clear all the remaining trees, fill, level, and grade parcel at Parcel 7A, located within the Buckwalter Planned Unit Development. And further, the Buckwalter Commons Phase 1 Master Plan consisting of 1.5 acres. Highlighting my laptop screen, but it's not highlighting up there. Anyway, you can see the parcel in red with the yellow arrow. Townhomes, lots behind it. That is the Buckwalter Towns townhomes. The intersection of Buckwalter Towns, Buckwalter Parkway, and Bluffton Parkway. I believe I have an aerial. A little more background. The application is subject to the standards set forth in the Buckwalter PUD Agreement, Buckwalter Commons Phase 1 Master Plan. Again, the applicant is not proposing to develop or construct buildings, roads, or parking to serve a specific use on the property, but instead is proposing to clear all the remaining trees, fill and grade the 1.5 acre site that was previously cleared in approximately 2009. Sometime between 2008 2009. I've got some aerial photos to show you. This preliminary application was actually reviewed by staff and the Development Review Committee. Comments were provided at the February 10th meeting of the DRC. The applicant has provided a response to comments subsequent to that. Buckwalter Commons Phase 1 Master Plan identifying parcel C7. Parcel 7A is a portion of that. And the use, as you can see, highlighted on the land use chart there is apartment and commercial mixed use. There's an aerial photo that I referred to. So this was taken 2008. You can see parcel was covered in silviculture planted pines sometime between 2008 and when this photo was taken in 2009, the parcel was completely clear, with the exception of a few trees along the perimeter. I'm going to see if this will work again. I have the cursor. You can see I don't know if it's the slideshow, but it's showing up on my monitor, and now it's not showing up on the projector. So, and this was taken in 2020. So you can see the site to the west, actually owned by Legal. That site has been allowed to revegetate, and the partially allowed to revegetate down in the southeast corner, along that little wetland, and the remainder of it remains fairly able to be bush hogged and cleared as needed. So on a preliminary application, as you're familiar, there are 6 criteria that you will review when recommend approval, denial, or approval with conditions. I'm going to go through those criteria one by one. First criteria is conformance with the applicable provisions provided in Article 5 of the Design Standards. This is actually within the Buckwalter PUD and not subject to the Unified Development Ordinance, but under criteria 2, the proposed development shall be in conformance with any approved development agreement, PUD concept plan, master plan, subdivision plan, or other plans that are applicable. So staff finding is that per the demolition plan provided, the applicant is proposing to remove all remaining trees on site per Beaufort County Zoning and Development Standards Ordinance, commonly known as BDSO 90-3, Section 527.9. Clear cutting is prohibited. Furthermore, staff is finding is the applicant is requesting a permit for clearing, filling, and grading only, and is not proposed as specific use or locations of buildings, roadways, parking, or open space. This time, the future use of the property is unknown, and a determination cannot be made as to the conformance with the development agreement or master plan. Number 3, if it's associated with a previously approved master plan, it shall adhere to the traffic and access plans that were provided at that time. Staff finding is a traffic impact analysis was included with the Buckwalter PUD development agreement and the Phase 1 master plan. But as no specific use has been provided, no additional information relating to traffic has been provided. 4, the applicant has noted that the required utilities will be required, are available, pulling from Buckwalter Towns Boulevard, and those service letters can be provided at the time of final development plan application. Number 5, the applicant's proposing, in regard to phasing, the applicant is proposing grading and earthwork only, and not proposing construction of infrastructure, roads, parking, utilities, or buildings that would require phasing. The clearing, filling, and grading that's proposed is to be completed in a single phase. Lastly, the application must comply with applicable requirements in the application's manual. Staff has found that the application we have determined that the application is incomplete. Per the comments provided at DRC, February 10, 2021, the application is lacking the following materials that are required per the development plan application checklist. A signed development plan application checklist, a narrative describing the proposed development and uses for the site, a schematic layout and design indicating overall site configuration to include roadway design, building locations, building size, general setbacks and orientations, general location and ingress egress of parking areas on the site, proposed open space areas, and a narrative or plan notes describing the proposed exterior lighting scheme for the property. Further, the applicant maintains that the application is for grading only. Therefore, those application requirements for specific use site configuration and traffic access, et cetera, don't apply. Unfortunately, there's no provision within the Town of Bluffton for a grading-only permit. The grading and land disturbance that are described are only permitted through a final development plan, or at the time of issuance, that permit is issued with the approval of the final development plan. So again, the Planning Commission has the authority to take the following actions. You can approve this application as submitted. You can approve the application with conditions, or you can deny the application as submitted. Staff is recommending the application be denied as it is incomplete and lacking the following information listed in the review criteria under item 6. Signed development plan application checklist, a narrative describing the proposed development and uses for the site, a schematic layout and design indicating overall site configuration to include roadway design, building locations, building size, general setbacks and orientations, general location and ingress/egress of parking areas on the site, proposed open spaces, and a narrative or plan notes describing the proposed exterior lighting scheme for the property. I'm happy to answer any questions. I saw Josh, and I did not see Tom come in earlier, but applicant and owner is here as well.
Anybody have any questions for Will? Okay. Would the applicant or owner like to comment?
Hello, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your giving me the opportunity to speak tonight
Please
about.
state your name for the
My name
record.
is Tom Zinn, Z-I-N-N, and I've been working in Buckwater since 1999. So been on a lot of boards and commissions and headed up a lot of initiatives and so forth and so on during the last 22 years. And own the 1.5 acres in the towns of Buckwater, which goes back a long way, and as Will pointed out, started out with the residential piece first, and then the commercial pieces in front, mixed use, similar to a lot of the other projects we've worked on, Crossroads and Buckwater Place to some degree now that we have interconnectivity to the residential piece. The background of the lot, in addition to what Will had said, was that the lot has already gone through and was approved for grading only. And unfortunately, it expired at the end of 1 year, and I didn't renew it during that 1 year period of time. So there's a lot of history, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I will give you, highlights of the history of that as to this particular lot and the grading only permit. I'll also talk about other grading-only permits within a stone's throw of this location that have been permitted in the past, and the reasons for the permission in the past. So it goes beyond just simply this particular lot, but it's actually beneficial to the town of Bluffton to have a grading-only permit under certain circumstances. Now, the circumstances where it does not make sense to do so is where you have no infrastructure. You have no utilities, you have no whatever, and people go out and they clear lots and they grade lots without any plan. That's wrong. That's wrong. It helps marketing, sure it does, but it's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is to maximize the number of trees you can have for as long as you can prior to development. And that's exactly what we did on this lot. In 2008, the town of Bluffton passed a policy called the Good Neighbor Policy. The Good Neighbor Policy encouraged all developers to maximize the number of trees that they had on their site for as long as they had, that they could before, the market caught up and it was time to develop the property. The head of the POA at the towns of Buckwalter came to me. We met on site. He remembers it better than I, frankly, in terms of the details, what cars we were driving. And he asked me to keep some trees. The trees that you saw there, the thinned out trees, we had the right to take down. We had the right to clear cut. We had the right to have not a single tree out there. We passed on the opportunity, decided not to do it because we followed the good neighbor policy as we did in Buckwater Place, Buckwater Crossroads, and all the rest of the developments we've been in. Now, should we have done that 2020 hindsight over the last couple of months? Probably a mistake, but you know, you live and learn. But from a greater good standpoint, we did the right thing, and we encouraged others to do the right thing. Stefan Baruth, who was the president of the POA, sent a letter. That letter is inside the package that I sent out earlier today. In fact, I toyed around with different ways to present this because it can be presented in a lot of different ways. Frankly, there's two major issues. All the rest of it, you know, are just static. It's kind of like the dirt pile that we talked about early on. But the two major issues that exist out there deal with a grading-only permit and grading without a specific use. Everything else that goes into these comments, into the communication, into the three emails that I asked to be distributed to the Planning Commission really revolve around those two things. The issue becomes, should the Planning Commission allow the final phase of our horizontal development without a specific user? Here you can see there wasn't a specific user for any of these tracks. Any of them. We didn't have specific users. And you'll also see in the notes,
Pardon me, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry.
You need the microphone for that.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Richardson. Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate it. I'm sorry. I haven't done this for a long time. I used to do a lot in the year 2000, 2001, but I'm getting kind of in the age where I'm not really making presentations and I mess up some things. So thank you both. Thank all three of you. So anyhow, you can start up there at C1, which is the tract on the right. That was cleared without, you know, any users. The property, the first property down the vineyard was constructed. The property to the south of that, which now has a child care facility to be put on it, was cleared and graded. The user was found. Again, it was speculative development in terms of the horizontal component to it. And they now are moving forward with a plan to have a child care facility on that site. They spoke to me. We got 20 emails going back and forth. You know, I couldn't promise a delivery date because of where we're going, what we've been going through for the last year. Obviously, the delivery date was there. Why? Because I followed this good neighbor policy, which, you know, obviously was not to my benefit. To the south of that is C2. 100% of that property was speculative development, speculative horizontal development. All the trees were taken out. Basically, you had the infrastructure placed in, and the buyers were not identified. The users were not identified. They showed up, they made an offer, they were accepted, and we now have a car wash and Parker's and Optum Healthcare and so forth and so on that track. Same thing applies to Washington Square. 37 acres, clear cut. Not a single tree left, not following the good neighbor policy. But they, in fact, they didn't have a single user for any portion of that tract. The fact of the matter is, though, they were allowed to finish the grading of their lots, realizing, as Heather said, they're going to regrade it anyhow. They graded it, they took down the trees, and they're regrading it. The idea of not following the good neighbor policy is a major mistake. And I urge you to consider, you know, reversing that decision and beginning to institute that policy. The grading without a user, again, it's just not done. So if the issue is, in fact, should the Planning Commission allow the final phase of our horizontal development without a specific user, it'd be tough to say, it would be tough to justify. I'm still looking for, you know, some logic that really suggests that the answer to that question is anything but yes, they should allow it. Back when the first when the first grading-only permit was granted, in the package I sent out last night, you got this morning, where my comments lie, I've had attachment 1 in the attachments. It's the very first one. In there, it clearly specifies the conditions on which the grading permit was approved for this very same lot. We submitted virtually the identical package, 99.9% of it, other than the date, a few other things were identical. In that package, in item number 1, you'll find that a meeting took place with staff and my engineer at the time. It was approved, and the minutes to the meeting, I'm going to summarize it, but it's in your package under attachment 1, basically provided that the defined scope of the work requires a grading permit. That was a decision by the Town of Bluffton with my engineer in attendance. Second item, the grading permit is established through protocols in place for the development plan application. Again, that's with the minutes with the Town of Bluffton. Thirdly, non-applicable items from the development plan application will be admitted. We can cover what those items are that were omitted, but obviously the development plan application is a long list of stuff, and not all that stuff is applicable. Fourthly, where applicable, the application should be clearly indicated for grading permit only. So, fast forward 4 years, you're not allowed to have a grading permit only. Again, I don't think we should have grading permits only unless you have a situation like mine or similar where you have all infrastructure in place. A subdivision. 5 lots were created through the subdivision process, and we followed the good neighbor policy. Anyhow, number 4, where applicable, the application should be clearly indicated for grading permit only. Number 5, applicant may proceed from pre-application to final plan submission, omitting the step or preliminary plan review. Next one, no physical development is proposed at this time. The actual use of the site was unknown. Again, it was speculative development. We didn't have a user back then, as did anybody up and down Buckwater Parkway and Buckwater Commons, which was 250 acres. That included wetlands, but you throw in Buckwater Place, there was at least 250 upland acres that I'm speaking for with regard to projects without, that were done with horizontal speculative development. The time frame for the town review of the application is approximately 3 weeks. 10-day review period, DRC meeting, then respond to applicant. So we did it basically around 3 weeks last time around. This time, I applied for this permit in January. We had our DRC in February, and we're here today. But I've been working on this thing for over a year because we had a lot of discussions last year about it as well. Doing parts of it, at least providing the access, because right now the property doesn't have access. Even though we have an access, we have a curb cut, but you need to go across some property that you can't go across with a vehicle to get to the property. But anyhow, that's a detail. It was done in that town. It was done within a very quick time frame. There wasn't a lot of issue. And moving on, the final one, which is probably the most important one from a 20,000-foot perspective, which is applicable today. The work proposed will improve the overall aesthetics for the site. If you go out there today and take a look at it, if you grant this grading permit and look at it 6 months from now, you will agree with me that the site's going to look better. It's going to look a lot better. And we have a long track record of developing a lot of real estate. The real estate has a lot of trees on it. We left a lot of trees incrementally on it. Incidentally, one thing Will said about the comments that were attached, I've had a number of emails that took place subsequent to the DRC meeting. The email that was attached to the package, which is an email that I sent before the DRC meeting. It was sent for us to discuss some of these kinds of things at the DRC meeting, which was the reason why I said it. It wasn't my response to what the DRC had to say. It's like me, it's like the package I sent this morning. You all talk, you'll do what you do, but the package that I'm going to send to you after this meeting, if I send you something after this meeting, that's the one we need to be looking at, not something I sent to you here yesterday, because that's irrelevant. That's not even current, if you know what I mean. Okay, so where does the problem lie? Where did this come about? I'm thinking back to my past, and the problem lies is we have a development plan application checklist. And I think it's great to go through these development plan application checklists. It's really important. Not everything on this is applicable to everything that we talked about. There's a lot of things that go and get admitted, as it says here with regard to the permit for the grading permit. There's a lot of stuff gets admitted. However, on this development plan checklist, there is number 3, a detailed narrative describing the existing describing the uses, the proposed uses and activities will be conducted on the site. That's absolutely correct. That's right there, number 3. You move on, the following page under lot and building pattern, number 1, a schematic layout and design indicating overall size configuration, roadway design, building locations, building sizes, general setbacks, and building orientation. Absolutely. We fail miserably, but that's not the intention. The intention of this isn't...
Then go back to the podium.
I'm going to move this and I'll talk. Those items were applicable to large planned development, like Crossroads, like the 37 acres that lie over at Washington Square. That's where we get into the detail dealing with uses. That's where we get into the detail of overall site configuration, roadway design. You know, I'm not going to be designing the roadway for 170. Washington Square is not going to be designing the roadway for the Buckwater Parkway. They're going to be designing the internal roadways, Ludlow. They're going to design that. Our internal roadway is already in place. It's called Buckwater Towns Boulevard. It's been in place since 2005. We don't have a roadway to design. Building location. There's not a single location on that where the building location was identified. The building locations are identified in the master plan, and it will change. But yes, we have 465 square feet of building locations on our master plan that you see there for 70 acres of the Crossroads development. That's what was intended, not building location on a lot, which has never taken place on any of the lots in Buckwater Place or in Buckwater Commons, ever, from a speculative standpoint. Now, when Bluffton Fresh came on board, yeah, that's different. That's at the building permit stage, but we're not at the building permit stage. So anyhow, this application plan is the genesis for the comments that you see related to the issues on grading without specified users, and also matters dealing with the grading only permit. Also, in the grading only permit, there's phases to these things, as you know. There's infinite phases to these things. You know, I could go and say, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to put in some utilities, some landscaping, and maybe some streetlights. There's not a permit. There's not a permit for streetlights and landscaping. Now, so you're going to deny an applicant the ability to put the streetlights and the landscaping and so forth in because there's not a permit in the code? No, it makes no sense to do that. The grading process, there's many, many phases to developing the horizontal infrastructure, as there is with vertical infrastructure, and the grading component is just one of those many phases to the development. let's, if you don't mind, and you know, when you get tired, just let me know. Let's stop. But I'm kind of passionate about this. We'll go through the planning staff report, if that's okay. The staff report and some of the things Will said, so I can kind of put this in the context of what we just talked about with regard to grading-only permits and so forth and so on.
Can I ask you a question real quick, just because I think we're getting a lot of information and it's kind of overwhelming. Can we take a pause and maybe ask some questions if we have?
Oh,
them
yeah,
right
yeah,
now?
absolutely. We could do it
Because
in whatever
there's
format you want.
There's a lot of information.
I have, there's a lot of information, a ton of history. There's 20 years of history here.
And
And I don't want to take up a lot of your time talking about things that, and I definitely don't want to talk about anything redundant. But if you could do that, that would be great.
I do have a question as far as timing, and why are we doing this now versus whenever you had the permit? Like, what's changed between, like, why are you coming now versus?
Oh, okay, the question, let me rephrase it. Why didn't you get it done within that 1 year?
Sure, why didn't you get
Why
it
don't we
within the
start
permit
there
time?
and go from there? Well, I had a lot, and that lot, we ended up getting a grading-only permit on. It was on the southern corner, right before you go to Mystic Bluffs, 0.7 acres. And it had some stockpiled dirt on it that we had used in conjunction with the other things. And it had a bunch of trees, because I didn't, you know, I did follow the good neighbor policy and stuff, and we said, hey, the time is right, let's do it. And so we were in the process of doing it. I, being a good neighbor, allowed the folks at Mystic Bluff to leave a lot of their equipment there and so forth and so on. And lo and behold, and I can send emails to confirm this if you need it, my 48 truckloads of dirt, basically, the contractor, you know, they were gone. So I didn't have my soil. I got my soil back, and when I got the 48 loads of sand back from the mine on the Bluffton Parkway, the year was up. So I missed that opportunity. I didn't think it was a big deal. I didn't think that there was going to be a huge policy shift with regard to.
I guess that's what I'm trying to understand is the timing. And maybe, Will, you can help me from whenever he had this grading permit to when something changed in the code, I guess, or what the requirements are. Like, where did this shift and change happen, and how did he get caught up in that, I guess?
All right, so just to clarify, actually, there was a permit issued 2017, and per the Unified Development Ordinance, that permit expires in 2 years. So after a period of 2 years, as we were cleaning up, if you will, our permitting system, we sent letters to everyone who had not acted on an approved permit and letting them know that per this section of the code, your permit has expired. You know, there was an opportunity to, you know, to have applied for an extension of that permit, but that opportunity had passed by that point.
So there was no extension filed?
There was a request for an extension after it had expired, but there's no provision to provide an extension. That request was made to the UDO administrator, but there's no provision to provide an extension after the permit has expired. You knowing that your permit is nearing expiration, you can request a permit to extend it prior to expiration, but not after.
Okay.
May I comment? I will swear on a stack of Bibles I'd never, ever received a letter.
And then are those are mailed out?
Those are sent by
certified, or-
registered letter, correct?
No, it was not registered
Okay,
letter.
I never received a letter. I'd never received notification. It ought to be on, at least at a minimum, on the computer someplace that this letter was sent. Whether it got to me or not is a different issue, but the issue is whether it was sent. And a computer here in Town Hall should have the letter that was sent to me.
Kevin?
Sure, that was sent as an email, as a courtesy, to the fact that.
It's not a requirement.
It's not a requirement, no.
That's good, but let me see the email. I mean, there's a representation made that I received something.
Well,
And if it was by email, there's electronic
either way, the
verification
permit
that
was
was sent and
2
received.
years, so.
Pardon me? This is
Either
the
way,
first
the
time I've
permit-
heard of that. Very first time I've ever heard of this.
Well, either way, the permit was up in 2019. So now it's 2021, so you've been working on this since 2019 to try and get it again?
I have
Or
been
was
working
there
on
a-
it for well over a year.
And
I'd have to
so-
go back, I'd have to go back to see, actually, in your packet, in your, not this last package, but the package before, Heather sent an email to me dated, I think it was May 23rd, 2020, in which she said that she's referred it on to Will and Kevin, who will, let me get their words.
In between the 2019 and 2020, was there a code change that changed something?
No.
So the grading permit, when did that whole change? If it's no longer allowed, when did that change? If he had it at one time, when did that change?
We issued a permit that at this point we recognized was in error, and we didn't want to repeat that error.
So that was never really a thing. So if he had done it in the 2 years, then he would have been advantageous over someone else because it really shouldn't have happened. So it's never been a permit.
Yeah, there's never been a grading-only permit
Okay,
at the town, no.
okay.
We got a grading-only permit on the track I just referred to that had the 48 loads of dirt on it. That was a grading-only permit.
So I'm just trying to understand if it was,
Further,
supposed to be a permit or it wasn't, but it was an error on the town that was in favor of the applicant at the time. But going forward, it should never have happened because it doesn't exist, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to point to several places, and I'll come right back. That wetland, the town of Bluffton came to me and asked me to grade it only,
Pointing
which
to
I
phase
did,
2 for everybody.
which is right across the street from the front entrance of CareCorps. That grading only I did at the request of the town, cost me, let's say $65,000. I don't remember the exact number, but that took place. Number two,
Pointing at another part in phase 2.
that took place long after the, and that took place recently. That took place, well, the dirt pile was there we're talking about. That dirt pile was removed, trees were removed, a grading permit was issued, and I sold the property to Dan Iyer, the veterinarian who's over at Publix, next to Publix. That was issued long after what we're talking about here. No other, well, I'm pointing to one that actually occurred. Number three,
Pointing to another piece in phase 2.
this one is owned by the town of Bluffton. It has 4.72 acres. It's an economic development piece. It's the only piece of real estate that's going to be available in Buckwater Place in the future. What's needed on that tract is some serious bush hogging to make it so that it's attractive. We spent a lot of money on economic development. The town does. The tract is not, please go out and take a look behind the police station, take a look at it and see if it's a marketable site. And I think you're going to find, and I'd be happy to spend $1,000 to clean it up. It's part of this process. We used to spend a lot of money in economic development back in the day when we first got started.
I do have a
And-
question for Richardson then, because there's a lot of, I guess, misinformation, miscommunication, but as a planning commission, we have a certain duty to go by the review criteria. So if he's saying that he wants a permit, who does the grading permit? Who decides that?
So, Madam Chairwoman, if I can try to take an opportunity to kind of offer a synopsis of what I've heard today, and having spoken with the applicant before and having spoken with staff about this particular issue, kind of to bring myself up on it as well. The applicant back in 2017 had what was called a grading permit. It was issued by the town, and the town discovered after that had expired that there was no process to acquire a grading permit. When you look at the Buckwalter Development Agreement, the applications for development, and grading is considered part of that definition of development. That would be a development plan, what we are here today, this application. The Planning Commission and the UDO administrator have the joint authority to make a determination on a preliminary development plan, and then the UDO administrator with the final development plan. Y'all's responsibility to do is evaluate the application for the development plan under the set criteria that staff went through earlier. The criteria that staff is saying that the development plan application does not meet really boils down to the submission being largely just about grading and not having additional information that is required as a development plan, but may not have been required if the applicant had been seeking what was formerly thought of as just a grading permit application. And so we have a change in the interpretation of the relevant zoning regulations that has kind of created this little bit of an issue. Where
Who makes
it's
that determination of the line that's crossed?
where is the determination? It's ultimately up to the UDO administrator and staff. If staff has made an error in the past, they're under no obligation legally to continue to make that same error. And that really is what the issue is. They've made a determination that what they were permitting in the past was not appropriate, and it was not authorized by town council or the development agreement. Without kind of veering off the subject too much, the applicant also mentioned a good neighbor policy that may have been adopted by the town in 2008. To the best of my knowledge, there's nothing definitive stating that town council adopted a good neighbor policy, and it'd really be town council is the only one who could, even in theory, override a zoning ordinance with a policy. But even that, it's a zoning ordinance. What you are permitted is set by law, and policies or determinations from staff can't override what the set law is in a particular circumstance, or what it is on the record. And so the development agreement is what controls. Your criteria are set as the 6 criteria, and ultimately it's up to y'all to see whether the application is submitted by the applicant meets the criteria for a development plan approval. And I hope I summarized that in a way that was
Right. I just want everybody to
digestible.
understand what our duty is and what we're reviewing against. So if he is adamant about this grading permit, who would he need to, or what would the avenue be for him to go down to have that put
Yes.
into effect? Or
So if the applicant wants to have a process for a grading permit only to be incorporated into the development agreement, I may have to defer a little bit to staff, but that process would be a very, an expansive process that would include a development agreement amendment to create this grading permit process. And then potentially, I'm searching for Heather, who actually knows the answer to this question. But I think you would need a development agreement amendment, which would require 2 readings of council, and it's similar to a UDO text amendment. The other option, if the applicant wants to grade the property, my understanding from staff's interpretation of the development agreement at this point, is to go through and get a development plan. And the development plan requires that the uses be provided and that certain infrastructure and proposed building layout, I believe, all that's set forth in the Buckwalter Development Agreement be included in the development plan. So the fact that it lacks those particulars, according to staff, is largely the basis for the denial.
another question, and I forgot what it was right now.
Absolutely.
Thinking.
What's your overall goal for clear cutting the lot and grading it with absolute no use or?
My goal is to make it Country Club beautiful the way everything else is that we have done in Buckwalter Place and so forth and so on. The lot right now is not a very pretty lot. We recommend to folks like the town on its 4.7 acres, and we recommend ourselves that these properties don't need to look the way they look, and it doesn't look like it's not characteristic of what we have. The ultimate goal will be to either do a build-to-suit or sell it, or do something with it, make it more attractive so that Ivy Brook comes back to our parcel rather than where they're going to go to the next. I have a lot of comments on what Richardson said, you know, and he knows law 1,000 times better than me, but I can guarantee you in the year 2000, and Lewis Hamlin can concur with this one, we all sat together, we crafted this development agreement. This development agreement wasn't going to change with policy or personnel. This development agreement was going to stand and withhold the test of time as provided by state law. The development agreement on the very first substantive thing that it says in the development agreement, this is our Buckwater Tract Development Agreement in the front, the very first substantive thing, development agreements will encourage the vesting of property rights by protecting such rights from the effects of subsequently enacted local legislation or from the effects of changing policies and procedures of local government agencies which may conflict with any term or provision of the development agreement or in any way hinder, restrict, or prevent the development of the project. And that's based on state law. And state law says the lack of certainty of the approval of a development can result in a waste of economic and land resources, so forth and so on. It can cause the cost of the development to escalate, encourage private participation, predictability encourages the maximum efficient utilization of resources at the legal economic cost to the public. Development agreements will encourage the vesting of property rights by protecting such rights from the effect of subsequently enacted legislation or from the effects of changing policies and procedures of local government agencies which may conflict with any term or provision of the development, and so forth and so on. We count on these things not changing with new staff and new administration. We're going to be with our
So let me ask, the development agreement for does it have language in there about
It allows the development of the
grading
real
permits
estate.
or things?
It allows phasing. This is a phase of the development process.
I remember my question now, maybe it's to Will or Kevin. So he's mentioned and compared it to like Washington Square. So what is the difference between what Washington Square, I guess, perhaps did with their planning versus what because he's in a development agreement, they're in a development agreement. So what's the difference between that?
Washington Square was granted a overall development plan for the development of infrastructure in Washington Square. They graded the property to install all of the stormwater infrastructure, and then the remaining parcels that would, in my opinion, would be analogous to parcel 7A off of Buckwalter Towns. Each of those remaining parcels is required to get a development plan approved, which, like Low Country Fresh, had to go through preliminary plans showing parking layout, building location, ADA access, everything that is on the development plan application checklist.
So we have an overall
I would say
development.
overall, if you wanted to make an analogy, parcel 7A would be the same as an undeveloped parcel within the Washington Square development plan that requires a development plan to be further developed.
Sorry?
Will, on that basis, wouldn't the buyer of a graded lot do all the things that we said every other development should do?
Yes.
They have to provide the
What
development plan.
we're doing here is preparing it for sale, but all those other processes would have to be accomplished, correct?
Before it could be,
Proof.
yes.
So in this instance, if it were graded now versus, say that it was, then the future development that came in, they'd have to come back and do all that all over again. I mean,
Yes.
and provide all of the other information that they need.
Because we don't know, right, what it's going to be. It could be medical offices, it could be whatever that fits into the zoning requirements. I'm just confused.
Going off Matt's question, it sounds like to me that this is to improve the property from a marketing standpoint so it's more sellable?
That would be one reason. That would be absolute one reason. And to tack on to what Will said, I have a detailed analysis at the very end of your attachments to answer the specific question that you have. And specifically, Heather wrote the following sentence. Other developments have been approved that include the associated infrastructure and pad-ready developments, such as Washington Square. This includes construction of all the related infrastructure, including stormwater, parking, and roads for specific uses, such as retail, restaurant, and office. Let's dissect that. If you turn to attachment 13, where I dissect every word of this, it's very important to listen to this because it's totally opposite of what Will just said. First of all, it says simply grading a lot and removing trees is not a permitted development activity. Okay. We believe the grading of our lot and removing mostly the small pines on 100% is consistent with the good neighbor policy that we talked about as expressed by Kim Jones on 8/18/2008 memorandum of staff and should be encouraged, especially since all master infrastructure are in place. We left trees there. That should be encouraged. Washington Square did not. Washington Square is this far down the football field. We're here. Why are we here? Because we're only asking to get to where Washington Square is today. We have more infrastructure than Washington Square has. I'm sorry. We have more infrastructure than Washington Square has, but we're stuck here. We're not allowed to do lot grading, whereas Washington Square is allowed to do lot grading. That's unfair.
But wasn't, what I'm understanding is that the original development plan for that area had all of that done.
For which area?
For, what is it called, Buckwalter, whatever your PUD is called.
Towns? No, absolutely did not.
What?
We did not have all that done at the towns. All we did was to do some pine silviculture work.
What's the development agreement for, like, what parcels does that include, I guess, in that area? That includes all of those, like, his parcel 7A, what's the development agreement for that?
Okay.
Madam Chairwoman, if I can, that's part of the Buckwalter Development Agreement.
Right.
Parcel 7A is included within that. Are you asking what particular concept plan?
When that became a development agreement, there were things that had to be put in place at the time, correct?
I think you're confusing development agreement with development plan.
So there was no development plan?
Right. The development agreement is what established the PUD.
Yes, okay.
Development plans
So
are what is required to get an approved horizontal infrastructure, you know,
So that's why I'm
street layout,
trying to
parking.
figure out the comparison with Washington Squares. Like, what was the development plan in that? There was no development plan in that area, so is this an individual parcel now having to do its own? I don't understand how we can compare the two.
It's a direct comparison. Washington Square had 37 acres. This tract had 37 acres. This tract got its anchor, which is the residential piece, 214 townhomes. Washington Square put in its infrastructure. We put in our master infrastructure. All of our master infrastructure is in. It's called Town Center Boulevard.
But that's what I'm saying, is like, y'all both did those things.
We both did the same things.
But in the Washington Square, each individual parcel now has to come back and do their own development.
But they've already done their grading. They did their grading.
Wasn't that a part of the original development plan, is what I'm asking is.
Were all the parcels in that development part of a development plan?
Right. So
Yes.
Washington Square has a development plan with 37, whatever parcels it is. That was an overall development plan. When each one comes back, then they each have their own development plan.
And what they did, the big difference between what they did and what I did, and this is exactly what we as a town should not be encouraging, they clear cut it. They clear cut every tree, every piece of vegetation on that 37 acres is gone. If we have a recession, it could be gone for 10 years. We did the opposite.
And that's great that you did the opposite. I'm just trying to.
But now we're being penalized. We're being penalized for following the good neighbor policy that we followed by allowing vegetation to be there, and which is just incredibly unfair.
Well, I don't know
Because
that you're
had
being
we, had I
penalized. I'm just
known
trying to
what
get
we
the
had,
comparison
had I
of the-
known what we had known,
They still have to do what you're wanting to do. Like, if they want to develop that piece of parcel in their greater plan, they still have to follow the same steps. And that's what I'm trying to make sure that we're doing as a planning commission, the correct thing and going by the right criteria that we're allowed to rule on.
they've taken and they've done, it's basically, when we're talking grading, it's stump removal, okay? I mean, for all intents and purposes, getting a backhoe out there and disturbing the earth, okay? Getting down and pulling out these stumps, okay? That shortens the development time. That lets Ivy Brook open in the fall time instead of a year from now or whatever. It takes time. Well, you know how long it took Washington Square to take those stumps out of there? You know how long it took all that site work to get done? It's a very long period of time. Now that it's done, they don't have a pad-ready site, but they do have shovel-ready sites. They have 37 acres of shovel-ready sites, and I don't have a shovel-ready site on my 1.5 acres. And I'm asking to be able to have the same shovel-ready type of product that they have, and I have more infrastructure. I got signage in place. I got landscaping in place. I got full-grown trees in place. I got a lot of stuff on on Towns Boulevard that Washington Square does not have. But yet I'm not allowed to bring it up to be at that same point on the 50-yard line where Washington Square is. I'm sitting back here at the 30-yard line, having to pull out all those stumps and do all the things you have to do to get there to be able to be where Washington Square is today. I'm not asking to be ahead of them. I'm just asking to be at the same level that they are. And there's no reason that I can think of from a health, safety, and welfare standpoint that the town shouldn't approve it. There's no detriment for the town to issue the grading permit to get me to exactly where Washington Square is. And it's the right thing to do. You know, we talk about law and so forth, but at the end of the day, we all look at what is the right thing to do. And let's figure out how to get there.
But when Washington Square, what I understand, went through with their development plan, they had to go through all these requirements, and they did grading as part of their process, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying is like, that's why it's different, is that yours is a different development plan that I don't know what it went through, whenever it went through it. They're just up in time, but you both have to have the parcels go through a development plan.
Josh Tiller for the record. I think the difference is with Tom, he adopted the good neighbor policy. He held off on removing those trees and doing some of that grading that Washington Square took advantage of. So it's not that he's really, there's a different way to look at it. He's not really asking for a new development permit. He's actually asking to finish out that original development permit that expired.
And, okay, that makes sense, but if there isn't one if there really isn't that kind of permit in place, or it's not available or allowed, or the town, it doesn't exist.
But it understood. But remember that permit that allowed it to begin with expired.
Yeah. But can we, as Planning Commission, grant?
According to staff report, you have the option to approve it.
Does that mean that we would be granting a permit?
Preliminary development.
A
Madam
preliminary development plan, which would then allow for a permit? No. I just want to make sure I understand how it works.
Well, and I think Mr. Tiller did an excellent job of kind of summarizing the issue, that the difference between Washington Square and Parcel 7A is truly the fact that Washington Square went ahead and did what the applicant is requesting while still under their original approved development plan. Parcel 7A, the applicant's property, that development plan has expired. So under the development agreement, which again, as the applicant correctly pointed out, is law, it doesn't change with changing ordinances, it's meant to be static. Under the Buckwalter Development Agreement, he had to file a new a new application for a development plan. That has all this criteria that is required to be considered. The applicant is requesting that, in effect, his application be treated almost as an extension or allowing him to do what he would have been allowed to do under his approved development plan. And ultimately, it's the Planning Commission's decision as to whether to approve that preliminary development plan based on the criteria that was presented to you earlier. Staff's opinion is that it shouldn't be approved for the reasons that Mr. Howard explained. And ultimately, though, it's Planning Commission's decision on the preliminary development plan in conjunction with the UDO administrator. And then it would go to final development plan, which would be the decision of the UDO administrator.
Yeah, just to clarify, if the preliminary plan is approved, then the applicant would have to get a stormwater permit approved through the MS4. And then after a stormwater permit is approved, then the applicant would be required to submit a final development plan. And that is ultimately reviewed by staff and approved by the UDO administrator. So your approval tonight is, if you're reviewing tonight, is preliminary plan, not grading permit. You're reviewing a preliminary development plan against the 6 criteria that are in the staff report.
Right, okay, that's why I want to make clear
Richardson,
what we are approving
question.
or not.
Based on what I'm hearing, if we were to approve, we're essentially approving a waiver to existing rules.
Mr. Williams, I think that I could certainly see how you would interpret it that way. I'm trying not to influence y'all's decision one way or another, and so the waiver of existing rules is kind of loaded. I think what you would be approving is that you would be overriding staff's opinion as to whether the criteria has been met. You would be saying that, or if you think that maybe the criteria hasn't been met, this information was not provided, you would essentially be disregarding some of the criteria, and you would just need to incorporate that into whatever motion you felt, whatever motion with the findings of fact, conclusions of law. But in effect, yes, sir, you'd be almost, I think the most proper analogy would be almost granting a variance from what the set law is to allow, or what the development agreement requires, to permitting almost an extension of the original underlying development agreement to allow the applicant to, development plan, to allow the applicant to continue with the grading that he's requested.
So if someone approved it, they would need to explain why against the criteria that staff has given?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chairwoman. So anytime that y'all make a motion, it's always beneficial to include the findings of fact and conclusions of law, especially when it's in an issue that could potentially be challenged or litigated in the future.
Madam Chairman? What I have here messed up easily. Sorry about that. This was prepared in 2017, I think, and it is the conceptual plan for this piece of real estate that was used when we got the original grading permit, and it's the identical one submitted for this grading permit as well. This schematic, okay, because one of the things it talks, well, let's go through the list. These are the things required. A signed development plan application checklist. I signed it in New York 2nd, so that's out of the way. Done. The narrative describing the proposed development uses for the site. Again, that was intended for Washington Square, the uses for the site, that was intended for Buckwater Crossroads, Buckwater Place, not for a lot, not for a single lot. But anyhow, I put together the narrative in another 5 minutes, the narrative describing the proposed development and uses for the site, possible uses. What that is, that's what we used to develop back in the day when we did a lot of development, which is basically space that could be divvied up different kinds of ways depending on what the user needed. But it's speculative.
But tonight,
space.
That's not what we're.
What I'm saying is that discussion took place with Steve Bird about, putting together what we think we could do. And that's on our website, and we're marketing the heck out of it right now and saying, this is what could, now what's come to us is three child cares, a church, and a whole bunch of other stuff, none of which would use this site plan. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, this whole Publix thing, that got all approved with the site plan and never came to be. They have videos and everything and never came to be. Now, I could come to y'all and say, this is what I plan to do, but I'm not going to be that kind of a person. I'm not intending to build this empty building in this location. There's too many folks that want specific things for this location. But I'm going to follow this, and you're going to see I fulfilled every one of these. The next one is a schematic layout and design indicating overall site configuration, including roadway design in there, building location in there, building size, general setbacks, and orientation. All of that is here. All of that was submitted.
But Will, is that part of this
Package.
No, that was not part of the application.
So that's not something
under
that
review.
we can review?
That
Because it's
wa-
not
that
part
was-
of the application.
That was a part of the application.
Would that
That was
have been-
submitted, and that was absolutely submitted that did not take place in my two-page letter prior to DRC, but it absolutely was included in several of my packages after the DRC meeting.
It wasn't a proper, like, the information was there, but it wasn't a.
It's a conceptual plan that we did not, it's not reviewed as part of the preliminary development plan application. It's a concept plan that was provided
Just as
after the fact.
information.
Yes.
It
It was
wasn't
a concept
formal-
plan provided before the fact and continuously multiple times during and after, but not in my letter that took place the day before the DRC meeting in preparation for the DRC meeting. It was not in that letter.
But when you submit for your application for this review, that specific plan was just information only. It wasn't a proposed plan. It was just information only.
It was called a schematic layout and design. That's a schematic layout design. That's what we used the last time around.
I'm just trying to understand what the disconnect is here versus what.
It says the general location of ingress and egress of parking areas to the site. There's the parking areas, the egress and ingress. We actually have the curb cut. Washington Square doesn't have curb cuts. We have the
Let's
curb
not
cut to the
talk about
site.
Washington Square anymore. I want to understand
Okay?
the submittal for this application is what? Is that just for information only, or was that the actual plan submitted for review?
This is a concept plan that the applicant is, I think he just said, he has no intentions of constructing. So it was not reviewed as part of the preliminary application.
Okay, so that's what I'm saying is we can't review that as part of this application, right?
Richardson.
That's not the same thing as
Right.
what we're.
Richardson, going back to our two major items, okay? This is super important. The two major items are, do I need to have the use defined prior to moving forward? If that is true, okay, I am the only, in all of Buckwater Commons, all 250 acres, I'm the only piece of real estate where a use had to be defined before you could do any grading.
Madam Chairwoman, I think that question is better posed to staff as to what the ordinance requires. My understanding, based off of what staff has presented today, is that yes, the use is one of the requirements of a development plan, and that's part of what's And that's part of your consideration. So in looking at this application, looking at the review criteria, it's whether the development plan meets the review criteria before you. Staff has outlined what they believe is where the application fails to meet the applicable criteria. And as far as the concept plan or anything else, I can't really, I don't feel comfortable commenting on that.
Let me make
Chiming in on that, if I may, referring to uses, okay? When someone submits an application for a development plan, they need to let us know, is that an office use? Is that a restaurant use? Is that a retail use? Because there's various requirements for each one of those. So to conceptually, bring a plan in front of us and not tell us what the use is, well, that is going to have changes in the parking requirements. And that's usually a large factor that comes into play with the development of a site. You might have a site of 2,000 square feet where a restaurant is going to require 24 parking spaces versus 8 parking spaces. So that will make a huge difference when we're reviewing plans. So when we're asking for a use, like that's what we're referring to. Is it an office use, a retail use, a restaurant use? And that's the problem. We're not getting that. We're getting a speculative plan that is overlaid on a site plan to say that it might be this. We don't know.
So you have nothing to review
So
it against?
when we're reviewing this development plan, we need to know what is going to be constructed on that property. And he is not providing that information. What we're receiving is he wants to bring in and fill in 3 to 4 feet of dirt onto this property in order to, as he stated earlier, he had 48 truckloads of dirt that he needs to put somewhere. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking to put that dirt on this property with no plans for developing the site.
By putting building, I have more plans than Washington Square to develop their site. First of all. Number two, no, we're not putting 3 or 4 feet of fill on that property. But number three is that. But
your plans you show a grading plan with 3 to 4 feet as well as a stockpile of dirt on there.
Which we said we would remove, we would spread. The stockpile of dirt basically is you take the organics, you put them in a mound, you bring in the other dirt, you take the stockpile and you fill it in. Every development in Buckwater, every development in South Carolina, every development in the United States had a stockpile to do this.
All right, well.
But the fact is you want to minimize the length of time that stockpile is out there, which we promised and guaranteed we would do.
Okay, thank you. We've heard a lot, and we could probably talk about this all night long, so we need to kind of wrap up what everybody's got. Any extra questions? I just wanted everybody to be clear on what our charge is as the Planning Commission, what needs to be done on your part, what staff information needs. I just want everybody to be clear. Any questions? Yes, Terry.
Okay, another question for, I'm sorry. This is well-traveled territory, and this is my last meeting, so boy, I'm going for it.
Oh, you're going out with a bang.
Where I think there's confusion is, obviously, the way the UDO is written, staff has to go by that, all right? And you're saying that's the criteria we must use.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hancock.
And then, if that's the case, I mean, it sounds like there's some wiggle room here, or something happened. This was approved before, and now something changed. The only part that really confuses me, and Amanda touched upon it, is all that planning and design and use, because you don't know who's gonna buy it, right? All those decisions on parking, et cetera, will be determined once we know what's going to be what's going to be built, which is the case for every other development. Why is this different? That's where I'm really confused.
So I think it boils down to the fact that there's not an active development plan or other permit or current permit on the property. And in prior years, as the applicant had mentioned, the town in error recognized what was known as a grading permit, and there is no process in the development agreement for that. The applicant has said that the development agreement was intended to vest certain development rights, and that's absolutely true. But you have to read the development agreement for what it says, and it does not have a process for a grading permit. The process to get grading approved is a development plan, and the development plan has explicit criteria. So this explicit criteria that y'all are to consider today is what's there. That's really ultimately the issue, is that there's not an active permit. This is the permit that he would have to go through.
This would be the first step of a development.
Yes, sir. It would be, well, you have the master plan, the concept plan, but to get in and to start actually moving forward with development under the development agreement, you need the development plan. And there is no development plan in place, and that's what the applicant is applying for right now. And I certainly understand Mr. Zinn's frustration, and I think staff understands that as well, but
I think
ultimately,
we all do. I think we all do.
Ultimately, the question for the Planning Commission is, does it meet the criteria for the preliminary development plan and the criteria that has been provided by staff and the analysis provided by staff that it doesn't? Ultimately, it's difficult to kind of condense obviously a very complex and a long-standing issue down to such a simple analysis, but it's whether the application for the preliminary development plan meets the applicable criteria that's on the screen in front of you.
Right.
And that boils it down to what we were saying.
Any other question, comment?
No, I mean, I appreciate your frustration with, and also appreciate all the history. But, I mean, it's pretty simple to me. It boils down to this application and what's in it or what's not in it, regardless of what emotional ties are to it, so.
May I say 2 sentences?
2 sentences.
Thank you. Terry's absolutely right. 1 sentence. At a later date, Washington Square and we will decide whether there's going to be a restaurant, an office building, or some other use. And we're going to decide at that point in time how many parking spaces are going to be needed. We're going to decide the configuration and the size of the building. That is going to take place as a different step, and we have an ARB, a whole set of CC&Rs, design guidelines, the whole bailiwick of checks and balances to make sure that it gets done right. And it's in place, and it's been proven, and it's time tested over the last 20 years.
That's a long sentence.
That's my sentence. Thank you.
Anything else?
No, I'm agreeing with Trey. There's a lot of frustration here, but we wouldn't be here if you had applied for the extension when you were supposed to apply for it, correct? Correct?
I've got to say something on that. We wouldn't have, if that did not take place, we wouldn't have interconnectivity to Mystic Bluff. The only reason there's interconnectivity instead of connectivity to Mystic Bluff is I was a good neighbor with regard to those truckloads of dirt. I could have taken that dirt and I could have utilized it and done this.
That's not my question, sir. I'm sorry. My question is, if you had applied for the extension for the permit before it ran out, would we still be here?
I would, yes, the answer is I never got it. If they can prove that they got the email to Tom Zinn and I received that email that said that it was going to extend, absolutely, I'm gone. I lost. I'll throw up the white flags. But I didn't get the email. If I got the email, I agree.
It had to be on your calendar and your tickler file that this thing was coming. It was.
I didn't. That was a mistake. In terms of my component of it, was a mistake. Now, the notice component of it, but no, you're right. It should have been. It was not intentional. I missed it.
We don't want to, we understand your frustration, and we appreciate what you're trying to do. But as a planning commission, we are charged with certain criteria, and that's what we have to base it upon. So, Matt, do you have any other question? Good? Okay, so does anyone want to make a motion?
Move that we deny the application as submitted.
Is there a second?
Second?
Is there any further discussion? All those in favor of denial, please say aye.
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 No. Okay, on to the last new business, correct? Which is the UDO, it's a public hearing for the amendments to the Town of Bluffton Code of Ordinance, Chapter 23, Article 3, Application Process, Section 3.19, Site Feature Historic District, and Section 3.21, Sign Permits, Article 5, Design Standards, and Section 5.15.6Q, and Article 9, Charlotte.
All righty, thank you. Okay, we're all ready here. Thank you, Chairwoman Jackson. You have pretty much introduced this for me, so let me tell you why we are proposing to update our sign regulations. It's for a variety of reasons, including supporting our strategic plan. It is an action item to make government more efficient and high-performing. If you've read through our existing UDO, there is some vagueness within the existing sign sections that we are looking to improve. So we are providing more comprehensive regulations. It's not a substantial change, even though it may look like it. There's some reformatting that's being proposed. I'll explain that to you. We are streamlining some of our procedures, and we're ensuring that our regulations are legally compliant and that they're also content neutral. So signs are regulated in two ways in Bluffton, and as you know, a good portion of the community of the town is regulated by development agreements, approximately 92%. So most sign regulations are very specific to a particular PUD. Anywhere where signs are not addressed by the development agreement, then there's reliance on the Beaufort County zoning ordinance. We are specifically looking at the 8% of the town that is regulated by the UDO, and that includes areas that are within Old Town, and Old Town has its own specific sign regulations, and then there's everywhere else. So the sections that are proposed to be amended, you see up here, include Section 513, signs, and this is somewhat of a general section. And then there's the Old Town Bluffton Historic District sign guidelines, which are proposed to somewhat relate back to 513. We don't want a lot of redundancy in the ordinance and repetition, so we're proposing that we will cross-reference back to that section. Again, I'll explain that a little bit more. We're talking about the permitting portion as well for Old Town Bluffton. The permit process is called a site feature permit. Actually, permit doesn't exist in the title right now, but we're proposing to change that. And then there's a specific sign permit section that actually applies to the rest of town outside of Old Town, and it also applies to the PUDs. So don't mean to confuse you. It is a little bit confusing. And then additionally, there are some terms, definitions that we want to provide updates to as well. There are portions of the UDO that do reference signage, but we are not making amendments to those. That includes the lighting section. There's a particular subsection relating to, sign illumination. Non-conforming signs is another section, penalties and enforcement. None of these three sections will be addressed by the amendments that are proposed. So what I'd like to do is provide a very high-level overview of what's changing. If you'd like to go into specific changes to the text, we can do that. But right now, I just want to hit upon the things that are changing in each section. So as you see on the column to the left, there's our current sign section. Again, this relates to everywhere except Old Town and not the PUDs. And as you can see from the various subsections, the way it's organized is somewhat confusing. So the proposal is to reorganize what you see there. So for example, wall signs, directory signs, permissible signs will now become permanent signage, and setbacks from the right-of-way sign materials would then be under general requirements. So the reformatting, I think, will help readers find information much more quickly, and I think it'll help staff as well. So some of the highlights here with the bullet points, improved intent statements, including statements relating to content neutrality, non-discriminatory regulations, as well as the protection of free speech. And this has been somewhat of a big issue for the past 6 years or so due to a Supreme Court case relating to signage in a small town in Arizona. And as a result of that, the way communities approach the sign section of their zoning ordinances has changed. So we are simply doing what a lot of other communities have done, and we're cleaning up our ordinance. Again, the cross-referencing will help the reader identify other sections of the ordinance that may apply. We don't have all of this information, unfortunately, under one section of the UDO, so I think this will help readers substantially. The exempt and prohibited sign sections aren't changing much. Again, we're just eliminating any vagueness that might be in those sections. The permanent sign section is where I think the most improvements will occur. Right now, we reference freestanding and building signs, but we don't specifically identify the sign types. So we're going to propose amendments to that. There's not a lot of change to our temporary sign section, mostly removing repetitive language in that section. The off-premise sign section relating to PUDs will remain, and we're including a sign maintenance section that includes minimum conditions that have to be met, and that a business would have to be operational. If it ceases after 30 days, then we could require the sign to be removed. The legal highlights here that I mentioned, the content neutral approach, we are focusing more on the non-communicative aspects of sign regulation, basically the time that signage can be placed out, including the temporary sign requirements, the manner, the size, how it might be illuminated. And we also include a portion of the UDO, or recommending that we include language in the UDO that relates to allowing a substitution clause, that commercial messages can be substituted for non-commercial messages. And that way, all speech is treated equally. We also have a severability section, and this is suggested by Richardson, that if any provisions of the sign-related sections are found to be unconstitutional or invalid, that it wouldn't invalidate other sections of the UDO. And that's something most sign sections do have.
And if I may, just to explain the rationality behind that, the Supreme Court case that Charlotte mentioned was, decided and argued by some incredibly brilliant legal minds that did not apply a lot of practicality to it. And it's very hard to understand and put into practice. It had to do with some very kind of extremely high-level First Amendment concerns, and there has been a lot of debate, a lot of concern about, well, how do we take that and actually incorporate it into a sign ordinance that is apparently constitutional? And there's a ton of disagreement on that. There are a number of different states that have tried to put out model sign ordinances, and they all differ quite a good bit. So this is really to protect, in the event that a single portion of it is somehow determined to be unconstitutional on First Amendment grounds in the future, that the rest of the sign ordinance can continue to stay in place. But it has nothing to do with an analysis of the work that staff did in putting this together. I think that they did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Let me move on to our sign permit section. As you can see, I've got 2 columns there basically showing that the format remains the same. The only thing that's changing there is including cross-references to other sections of the UDO. And with excuse me, I feel like I forgot something there. The next section would be related to Old Town. Again, Old Town has its own specific sign requirements, which, as you can see there from the left-hand column, again, it's a little unclear, these subsections, how you would find what signs are permitted. So the proposed format would follow something similar to what I showed you for Section 513. Exempt signs, prohibited signs, temporary signs, master sign plan will all reference back to 513. There is no mention right now of those in Old Town. The permanent signs are going to be reorganized a little bit so that it's clear what's permitted. Right now, freestanding signs are referenced as monument signs, and that's a particular sign type that requires a base that the sign sits on. And as you know from driving around Old Town, we have other types of freestanding signs, anything from what we're calling a post and arm, kind of the real estate sign with the sign hanging down. We also have double post signs or column signs. So we're just making certain that the reader understands that those other sign types are permitted. What we have for building signs, it's referenced as wall signs. Wall signs is a sign type, and it is proposed to change to building signs with a variety of building signs allowed. Wall signage, window signage, awning signs, canopy signs, and projecting signs. There is the ability to have some other signs in the building as well, but they fall under the exempt category and would not require a site feature permit. And we are proposing a master sign plan requirement, and that's certainly going to help when we have developments that have more than one business. We can require that up front, and as signs change out, we can identify how much signage there is on a building. So that'll help staff. The site feature historic district permit, again, we're adding the word permit to the title. This permit actually covers a variety of things, not just signage, but these are things that staff would review and don't require review by the Historic Preservation Commission. Anything from signs to modifications to site elements, which could be parking lots or lighting, garden structures intended to screen mechanical areas, maintenance and repair to the exterior. That doesn't change the architectural features. So it's a little bit more than signs. This is more than just a sign permit, so I wanted to make certain you understood that. Again, this is a streamlining of the section and then cross-referencing other parts of the UDO. And then finally, our last section that's proposed to be amended are the definitions. Some definitions are proposed to be revised, which I've identified here. Some new definitions are proposed. Again, I talked about the commercial message and non-commercial message. I want to make certain that the reader understands the differences between those. We also use the terminology for sign area and sign face, so we thought it was necessary to include definitions for that. And then we are proposing the elimination of some definitions that aren't actually used in the body of the UDO. So these did not seem necessary to keep. And I'm going to skip on to what the review criteria is for a text amendment, but if you want to review anything specific regarding the text amendments that are proposed, we can do that. There are 5 criteria that have to be considered when looking at a text amendment. Consistency with the comprehensive plan, which these UDO amendments are. These are minor adjustments to help with the long-term vision of the town, so it's consistent with that. With regard to demographic changes, prevailing economic trends, it's not so much associated with that, but I think we could say that it does further best planning practices by including the content neutrality language and making certain that it's legally compliant. Signage does enhance health, safety, and welfare. This is a concern perhaps related to motorists, nothing that's distracting to motorists. So for example, we do not permit animated signs within the town. It certainly furthers that criteria. There is no relationship to public services, and it does comply with the applications manual. So following up, you can approve the amendments as they've been proposed. You can make amendments to what's been provided, or you can deny the proposal.
Anybody have any questions for Charlotte? Clarifications?
I have one question right now. The sign area and sign face definitions, I just want to get an understanding of how those are considered distinctly different, and because I'm sure they're referenced in some mechanism within the document itself as to how those are applicable. The sign area looks very similar to how the county has their structure, but I've gone round and round with the county in terms of how they interpret their sign area and sign face area and the whole. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on the distinguishing characteristics of how you view sign area versus sign face.
So you actually identified something that I identified before the meeting when I was going through this. I think both definitions look very similar, and they need to be made more distinct. And typically when I use sign face, I'm referencing the singular face. Sign area usually means the entirety of the sign, both it could be the multiple panels, and I do think that needs to be clarified, so I would like an opportunity for staff to be able to correct that. Right now I don't have language to provide to you, but perhaps if the commission would allow staff to make a correction that we would feel comfortable with.
And just for clarification, this is still going to town council for 2 readings after this?
It will. So right now it's proposed to move forward to council for a first reading on the 13th and then for adoption, second reading on August 10th.
So there's still likely that some things might be modified by staff in addition to even what we might be commenting on up here now. Is that, or is this what we're fully intending to go with?
Normally, any modifications would be based off of
Our comments.
recommendations from the Planning Commission.
Okay.
So if the Planning Commission made recommendations for modifications, we would present that to Planning Commission. So we would update the document, but then also, put that original information in there as well, just so that way they could see pre-Planning Commission as well as kind of like post-Planning Commission.
So in your recommendation, you would comment on that?
Clarifying sign face area versus moment.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything else? Okay, so then we would need to make a motion or a recommendation to town council, correct?
Correct, with the provision that we adjust the language for sign area and sign face.
So Kathleen, would you like to make that?
Yeah, just one more question.
Sure.
In terms of where that sign area and sign face verbiage is used in this, do you have a point of reference as to where that might be?
It's usually, I think more often that I'm looking back or thinking back, sign face is more typically used. It's in the dimensions, the requirements for each sign type. It's specified.
One thing that, one thing I saw, there were some definitions about permanent and temporary sign. Sandwich boards, I didn't see mentioned as a specific qualifier in terms of temporary sign, and I thought that may be something that would be beneficial, and it's entirely possible I could have missed it.
It is in there.
Okay.
It's just referred to now as a portable sign.
You're calling it a portable sign?
A portable sign, correct.
Portable.
You know what page that's on?
It is,
That's in the definitions, is that so?
It is in the definitions section, and it is in the temporary sign types in 513. And I'm sorry, the page numbers got a little changed here. Let me find that for you.
So it's just covered under the any sign.
It's on page 66, so it would fall under temporary signage.
There's a lot of page.
It's a
to
lot,
cover.
yes, it is. The use of the term portable was intended to really get at any types of sandwich board A-frame signage or H-frame signs, and these would have to be brought in nightly.
Yeah.
Got it. And I think I saw in here signs where those kind of hanging banners that you've got, kind of, you put them in the ground, they come up, they've got business name on it. That's not going to be allowed under this kind of.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And any property that falls under the UDO, correct? So if you're under a PUD, that still could be allowed under the PUD, but if it's under the property
Correct.
that's under the UDO, it would not be allowed. Okay. And things like drivers wanted signs that are temporary, permanently in the ground in front of businesses.
Those are not permitted now and would not be permitted under the proposed ordinance.
Got it, okay. But political signs, that kind of thing is still
It is
allowed
still permitted,
temporarily
correct.
per a timeline that's
Right,
allowed.
right.
Okay. Another thing I noticed, and this was towards the beginning of the package, and it's not in the, I didn't, there's so much to go through. I didn't make it all the way. There was a discussion about removing, not allowing historic structures to be labeled on signs outside of the historic area.
That's an that's an exempt sign, so that is still permitted. It's allowed right now, and it's permitted under the proposal. So that is located on page 60.
You're saying under for the historic district. What I'm referring to is on page 50, where they talk about, and perhaps I misread it. I thought it said a non-related sign amendment to this section includes removing the reference to historic structures outside of Old Town as a process not yet exists to identify such structures. It sounded and perhaps I misread this, that if you're only allowed to write, historic on your property if you're a historic site within the Old Town Bluffton.
And I'm sorry for the confusion on that. So this relates to the site feature permit, and the site feature permit right now, as it reads, is for Old Town Historic District and historic structures that may be located outside of Old Town. We don't have any of those right now identified, and we don't have review criteria, even if we did. So for the time being, we've removed that. I'm not certain why that has been included in the site feature permit, but we presently don't review historic structures outside of Old Town.
Okay, so hypothetically, I have a property that's outside of Old Town Bluffton, outside of the historic district. So it's not been reviewed by the historic district preservation board or anything, but it falls under a state or a federal jurisdiction, and I am doing it. Let's say I'm doing a bed and breakfast, and I've got a historic structure that exists on site that's federally or state recognized. I could put a sign out in front of that says it's a historic site.
Correct,
Okay.
right. So it's exempt whether or not it's in Old Town or outside of Old Town.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm just making sure I didn't have any other. I think that's it.
Okay. Well, do you want to make the recommendation with those items?
Yes. I make a motion to approve the application with.
The recommendation, correct?
I'm sorry.
Is that how she needs to word it, as a recommendation?
I make a
Recommendation.
recommendation for the approval of the application with the amendment to address under the definitions, address the definitions of sign face and sign area to clarify those two words.
And
Yeah.
Madam Chairwoman, I can try to
why don't
put
you
that.
try?
No,
What
just
he
for the
said.
clarity of everybody. So, a motion to recommend Town Council for approval, the proposed sign amendments, with the recommendation that town staff clarify the distinction between sign area and sign face as included within the definitions.
Great. I
That
love
sounds
it.
wonderful.
What he
And then just a second is needed.
Okay, now, do we have a
Richardson,
second?
Thank you, sir. I
What would
second
we
it.
do without you? All those, or any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, do we have any other discussion, Kevin? Are we okay?
Back to
You want
the-
to talk to us?
Agenda here. While it's not listed on here, two of you are leaving us this evening. So Terry Hannick and Trey Griffin, thank you so much for all of the years of service that you have provided to us on this board. We really appreciate it. Heather is providing something for both of you, just a small token of our appreciation for all that you've done for us. So
Thank you very much.
thank you. And if both of you want to say something real quick, we'd appreciate it. So.
I sure do, and I'm sure Trey does. I just, now you have to. It's just been an honor and a joy to be a part of what happens here in this town and the Planning Commission and the staff. You guys have put up with me for so long with my calls, asking you crazy questions and everything, and I deeply appreciate it. Thank you.
You can still call with crazy questions. Kevin loves those. Do it all the time.
And Richardson, thank you for pulling me out of the fire a few times.
Been my pleasure.
Right.
I'll just second everything he just said. I'll make it easy, but I appreciate everything y'all do. And I wish y'all good luck.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We do have two individuals that have been appointed already. Rich Delcor is actually in the audience right now. So we had an orientation earlier today. So he'll be up on the dais starting next month, as well as an individual named Jason Stewart. He is actually the planning director for Rincon. He lives here in town. So he's been working in municipal planning for a very long time. So
Good
he's
addition.
yeah, so
We got somebody who knows what they're
Yep.
talking about.
Yep. So they'll be up there with you guys starting next month.
Great. Thank
Great.
you. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
I have a motion to adjourn.
I make a motion that
Make
we.
a motion. You want to second that?
Sure, I'll second
All
it.
right. I think everybody's in favor.
Thank you.